Yeah. Hey, I just want to welcome everybody. It is dark 30 here at Dulles Airport. I've got the lights of my car serving as my ring light. So,
Beautiful, beautiful.
yeah,
Okay, so we've got here the fifth cohort of the 20,000 Scale Up program here in London, and we're welcoming Verne Harnish, who is at Dulles International Airport. I think that's in Washington.
it is. Yeah, I'm on my
Yeah,
way down to Panama, where we're doing our taking executives into the jungle to learn how to scale.
very, very good. Well, Verne, over to you. We'll let you do a bit in terms of welcoming everybody on the cohort to the program,
Yeah.
your insights into the challenges of companies scaling up. And if you have got time, maybe field a few questions from the team here in the room.
You got it. So, hey, I do want to welcome all of you. You are, by the way, in unbelievable super hands with Neil. He's probably shared, if he hasn't, four of the first five companies in the first cohort have already exited for a combined $1 billion. And he clearly has become kind of Mr. Scale Up there in the UK. So, Neil, thank you for doing your work. And, as we pointed out, and I think there's been a lot of Formula One race car drivers have been credited with this, but as they've said, you cannot pass 15 cars when it's sunny, but you can when it's raining. And with all of the challenges out there around, threats of recession, which could be coming, inflation, Brexit, which you've been dealing with, and all of that, this is the time to do one thing. And it's what Margaret Heffernan, the great British software, one of the top 100 women entrepreneurs, said at the opening of the pandemic when we hosted her at our first virtual summit. She said, there's only one thing to do, and that is to be ambitious. This is the time to pass 15 cars and your competition out there in the marketplace. So I'd say that's number one. And part of that is really focusing on what is it that we could 10x. If you're only going to 2x, then you just have to do a little bit better than what you're already doing. But if you're going to look at finding that X factor inside the organization, that advantage over the competition, if you're going to look at which we think is easier maybe than revenue and cash, is 10xing the valuation of the organization, so you can go out and do acquisitions, or maybe at some point in the future there's going to be an exit for you. But for you to think about how do we 10x some aspect of the business, you actually have to do it different. And that's what the great Michael Porter, the strategy professor at Harvard, has said. You really don't have a strategy if you're not doing things different. And so we're really focused right now on pricing, and getting pricing right is critical in this environment. But if you price the way everybody else does, you're not really different. If you hire roughly the same people that everybody else does in your industry, you're not really different. And if you deliver your product or service in roughly the same way that everybody else does, then you're not different. And so that's the key as you look at people, strategy, execution, and cash, is can you find a different way to approach each one of those? And my partner who heads up our global coaching organization, John Ratliff, John, it wasn't Facebook, it wasn't Google, it was call centers. I consider them kind of the sweatshops of the information age. It's a commodity. I can get anybody to answer the phones from the Philippines through India to Mexico and every place in between. Yet in that kind of an industry that averages 200% turnover of its team, and that's an industry average before a war on talent, he was able to take that to an industry record-setting 18%, less than 1/10 the industry average, which gave him a tremendous advantage out there in the marketplace. He could stabilize his workforce. He's not spending $5,000 per $15 an hour employee, replacing them twice a year. And he was thus able to stabilize his workforce. And in an industry that averages 4% profitability, he took that. Why? He was growing 3,000%. A lot of people say, well, you can't really be profitable when you're growing. He grew 3,000% in 7 years and took profitability from 4% to 21.8%. and his company was Apple Tree. And I would calculate every year Apple's profitability. And I'd send him a note that, John, you beat Apple again by 1 point as a percent of profitability on revenue. And as a result, he took that, as I said, from 4% to 21.8%. And that's really the definition of greatness, is at the end of the day, you're 3 to 5 times industry average profitability. And let me give you maybe even a simpler measure. You know, in good companies, you, the senior team, you're stressed out, and everybody else in the organization seems very relaxed, kind of clueless to the challenges that the organization's facing. In a great organization, you're relaxed, and everyone else's hair is on fire for good reason, because they know exactly what it is they need to accomplish today. And the fact that you're able to be there and take time to do learning. And if you look at the barriers chapter, the number one constraint to scaling is right between our ears. It's not having the knowledge that we need in order to make these changes. The fact that you're able to take the time to be a part of this cohort tells me you're already on your way to greatness, if not already there. And by the way, in John's case, if you can find your internal 10x advantage, his was the turnover of employees, and you can get 3 to 5 times industry average profitability. A $2 billion company came along and said, John, you run call centers better than anyone else. He took it to about 650 employees through 24 buy-side acquisitions. And we do think scaling through acquisition is the right strategy, is a strategy, but a pretty important one over the next 3 to 5 years, as the aging populations in your country and my country are wanting to exit their small businesses. John was able to piece 24 of those small businesses together, and he exited for 14 times earnings, a public company multiple. And so, but he did it by approaching the people side different than everyone else. His strategy in the marketplace was different, including his pricing strategy, priced different than everyone else in the call center business. He executed in a much different way, finding what he called the Moneyball stat instead of the other 25 KPIs that everybody else was looking at in the industry. And ultimately, he even financed all of those acquisitions with a line of debt, acquisition credit at his local bank. So he didn't have to spend even $1 of his own money doing those 24 buy-side acquisitions. So doing it different becomes the key. So with that, I just want to welcome everybody. Again, you're in great hands with Neil, and let me open it up for a couple of questions, and then I'm going to go finish my drive to Dulles Airport and hop on my flight to Panama.
Brilliant. Thanks, Verne. Right, questions? Who's going to go first? Alrighty. Nikki. Hang on, just I'll get you a mic so Verne can hear you.
Or Neil, you can repeat it.
Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you, Nikki.
Okay. In terms of your experience in the really successful companies that have scaled, what does good marketing effectiveness look like?
It first recognizes that it's more than glorified sales support. That it also recognizes that generally the MD or the CEO is the default chief marketing officer, because marketing strategy equals strategy. And so it's really focused on two things. And I learned it from Regis McKenna. Regis is who advised Steve Jobs, Intel, Genentech, and most of Silicon Valley in terms of marketing, and me back in 1983, when I had this idea that I wanted to launch this worldwide organization to support entrepreneurs. I just cold called Regis McKenna, put out my vision, and he said, look, all right, I'll help you. I was his only free client. He said you had to do two things. One, you had to have a separate marketing meeting separate from sales. That's why they need, and that separation is critical. And marketing's job is to bring new relationships to the organizations. Obviously, new customers. We need it as much to bring in new talent, new investors, and equally new attention to the organization. So it is about relationships and identifying, and then arming. Their job should be to give sales the precise list of who they ought to go after. Who is the core customer? Where are we going to find them? And arm the salespeople with the information that they need. Because in sales has moved from sales 1.0, show up and throw up, your talking brochure. Nobody needs that. Sales 2.0 was the Neil Rackham spin selling, where I'm going to go into the client and I'm going to discern their challenges. Here's more B2B than B2C. And then I'm going to present my solution as being considerably less cost than what their problem is costing them. The problem is they're all shorthanded. And you're expected to know more about the problem that they're having than they know it. And so sales 3.0 is you're coming in and you're actually educating them on the depth of the cost of this challenge that you're trying to solve, and then presenting your solution. And no salesperson is going to do that kind of research. So marketing needs to be there front and center, driving the gathering of that intel, market intel, which is how all wars and all markets are won. And most importantly, getting clear, what is the voice of the customer? I'll just tell one story, and that's why intel is critical. We have a client, Roger Hardy, Coastal Contacts are selling contact lenses over the internet and the phone globally. And they called me in to do a strategy session, and they were sitting around 11 executives, 110 years experience in the industry. And they were discussing, should we lower our price? That's in the 4 P's of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion, updated to the 4 E's of marketing, which Neil may share. Anyway, they're sitting around talking about, should we lower our price in order to knock out some ankle-biting competitors? Should we extend our products into glasses and sunglasses? A product decision. Should we actually get into the service side of the business as a way to get closer to the customer? I could tell, Nikki, they were making stuff up as they were sitting around. So I said, look, you're not making any decision, and I'm going to put you on a diet of customer input. And for 3 months, they put in a net promoter score. And they, as senior leaders, called 20 customers every day collectively that had asked, hey, I wouldn't mind a phone call after answering their NPS. Long story short, I come back 3 months later. They're like, we learned we could raise our prices. A year later, and customers don't tell it directly, you have to see the patterns. They figured out that their happiest customers were those that were next to their distribution center, which meant they were automatically getting their contact lenses overnight. And when do people order their contact lenses? Not in advance, when they run out. And so they're like, since we raise price instead of lower, thank goodness, why don't we test overnighting all of our orders, whether they asked for it or not? They did the test. Revenue jumped 60%. They rolled that out, and they went from 60 million to $250 million, exited for the largest e-commerce deal in the history of Canada. Marketing's job is to get clear. What job does the customer really need us to do? And then arm the organization and the salespeople with the information they need in order then to close those sales. So good marketing is glorified, putting brochures together and putting up websites. Let's run a social media campaign. Great marketing starts with a deep understanding of the customer, understanding who is going to be the core customer, and that we're going to go after profit share instead of market share. And we're going to nail the 4 P's and 4 E's of marketing, which I don't think is more important strategy than marketing strategy. So long answer, Nikki, but it's an important topic.
Hi, Verne. It's Damien from Data Science Talent. Hope you're well. Nice that you could join us today. So mine question is somewhat related to the marketing question.
Yes.
We're a recruitment company in the business to business professional services arena, targeting large corporations, 10, 20,000 employees plus.
Perfect.
Who are you seeing in that space that have done the lead generation in a predictable, repeatable, sustainable way and have done it really well? If anyone that comes to mind.
What's the space again?
So we're in recruitment, so headhunting. So I rarely see good examples of business to business professional services firms that have very repeatable lead generation strategy that delivers regular leads every single month. So I'm just wondering if you've come across any examples of that we could.
Yeah, so we about a year ago we helped exit a firm that was in, well, first of all, the riches are in the niches. They had a very precise niche for the pharmaceutical industry where they were providing packaging talent that would help these big pharma design and develop the packaging that was necessary to put around their products. And it was a staffing function, but they became the best in the world. And part of the key was they had set up an operation in Vietnam. So where they had labor for the fraction of what it would cost in the United States. And that labor in Vietnam, and this is what we'd call the Rembrandt in the attic, they could have so many people scraping and really looking through LinkedIn and other sources of candidates that this is why on a company that ended up with about 3 million EBITDA exited for $90 million, 30 times earnings. But it's because exactly that. The constraint was getting enough leads, enough candidate flow. That was the constraint in this part of the industry. And they solved it with a very unique approach by outsourcing a big part of that identification of candidates to a team they set up and well-trained in Vietnam. And that cost advantage then over their competition is part of what the large company who ended up buying them saw and was willing to pay the 30 times earnings. So that's one example. Dwight Cooper, PPR, named the only mid-market company in the world by Gallup as best place to work. The other were Fortune 500. Part of his key was he utilized our top grading methodology to attract and then hire 15,000 nurses a year that they then provided to medical operations around the globe, Fortune 500 firms. And there the key was they had such a beautiful culture, and they saw, in this case, the nurse, because that was the constraint, as their key focus. And they built out one of the best cultures in support of nurses, that nurses chose to work for them than anyone else. And so when you get all the talent, then you're controlling the constraint in the industry. And Dwight did exit that firm after scaling it to 15,000 nurses placed every year to a PE firm about 2 years ago. So there's a couple of examples. Egon Zehnder, by the way, we think is the best in the world at supplying executive talent to Fortune 500. And I feature them in my new compensation book. And part of the key is they have a radically different approach to compensation of their recruiters than any other company in the world. And that advantage has made them the largest private recruiter to the Fortune Global 500 that exists today. So lots of difference in doing a kind of standard business, which is what's given every one of these firms an advantage. I hope that answered the question at some level.
Boom, one of the topics of conversation with the CEO dinner last night was around artificial intelligence. What are you seeing around this phenomenon of artificial intelligence at the moment?
Yeah. Well, there's a book called Prediction Machines, and it's written by 3 professors out of University of Toronto. At least in North America, University of Toronto has been the epicenter of AI, machine learning. They placed most of the people at Google and Facebook and Microsoft, and their business school is particularly focused on it. And here are the keys. 1, AI is neither artificial or intelligent. So it's kind of a bad term. Number 2, it's really about machine learning or pattern recognition. And so the key question is, and that's why they titled the book Prediction Machine, where you want to apply AI is any place where knowing something sooner than later and delivering a quicker answer can make or save you millions. Whether I need to deliver an answer to a customer, we've got a client co-distributing about 120 million. It's not Google or Facebook, it's distributing office furniture. But the number one question their customers have had in the supply chain challenges is, hey, but do you have it in stock, and when's its availability? JD was spending thousands of hours answering that question and taking up a lot of his people's time and customers' time trying to find the answers that they put in machine learning to scrape all the data that existed in the industry from their suppliers and their own inventory, gave her a name, and customers can come to the site and they don't even know it's not a human that's texting back or answering back, but they're using machine learning, in the Chat GPT kind of technologies to give customers that answer quicker than they can get from any of their competition. So your first question is, where would doing something, knowing something quicker, sooner than later, would make or save us millions? Now, how has JD then spun up his AI initiatives? And because for you to put in a machine learning function, is $250,000, £500,000, could be up, £1 million a year. Most of us can't afford that. So what JD did is he contracted with his local university, University of Pittsburgh. And almost every university has a data analytics department. And he got with the professor and he said, look, could I contract with your students to do one project every semester? And the cost is $10,000. Every one of us in this room can afford that. And his very first, and then all you have to do is get the right question, where you need the machine to predict a better answer than what you could get. And that first decision was, where should we put our next distribution center? A lot of people don't think of that as a prediction question, but that's your job, is to see around corners, as Steve Jobs said, to predict where would be the next best move to make. And so the students took on that. And what's nice about the students is they don't have any bias around the company, around its existing data. And they're also going to go out and look at the craziest data sets that you might not even consider. Anyway, they crunched all the numbers, and they not only said, JD, who's based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that it ought to be in Houston. They said, if you could put it in this building on this block in Houston, then that'll be the best decision. Well, that's what he did. Their second was, hey, like Netflix, who releases a lot of shows, and because they have all kinds of data about what's popular, how far people have watched in to a show, where did they happen to stop, they crunch so much data that they're able to predict before they even produce it that this show is going to be popular. So JD's like, I'm always releasing new office furniture ideas. It costs me a lot of money to test it. could machine learning maybe predict before I spend all that money whether this would be a popular product or not? That's a crazy question, but you know, if you could do that like Netflix can, it would save or make you millions. Well, the students modeled that out, saw data from the customer that even humans couldn't really, you know, see and crunch, and their models now are close to 80% accurate for JD. So he's been able to do a series of semester-long projects with these students for $10,000 that get at really tough questions he has around prediction, being right sooner than later. And now what he's done is he's hired a couple of those students and he's starting to build out that function in his organization. So that's where you want to start. Where would prediction make or save you millions?
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Stefan.
Yeah. Hi, Verne. Questions linked to something you were talking about earlier on, which is for us, one of our big challenges as we grow is people, scaling the people. So our strategy in that is we have an office in India, and now 25% of our workforce is in India. We're based in Chennai, where there's 11 million people. Access to talent is there. The challenge for us is culturally how we make that work so that it isn't just seen as an offshoring, but it's seen as part of the business, integrated in each of the teams, and how we do that successfully. We haven't worked that out. Just
well, you know, at the heart of it is our daily huddles. So we've got a client out of San Francisco. They're the ones that handle all the back end transactions for Visa, and so it's trillions of dollars of transactions. That they're headquartered in San Francisco, right next to Visa's headquarters, but their entire team that does that work is in Calcutta, India, for all the reasons that you're in Chennai. And the team in San Francisco, twice a day, so it's convenient for their team, is on a daily huddle via video, way before Zoom was popular, because they can't afford to mess up a transaction for Visa or they're in trouble. And it's that daily stand-up that they do with the entire team there. And then all of those employees are in some kind of a daily, is how they keep their San Francisco and corporate culture alive. And a big part of that's reviewing a core value each day, like they do at the Ritz-Carlton, that built one of the great cultures, making sure, but most importantly, the job of the leader is to keep the dumb stuff and the dumb people out of the organization in Calcutta. And they want to understand on a daily basis whether we've got the wrong person we happen to get in the organization driving everybody else crazy, and that we don't have good process. And because the people in Calcutta, number one, feel like they are cared for, and the way you show caring is attention. You know, out of sight, out of mind. You know, it's not going to be a good relationship with your spouse or significant other if they don't feel like they're getting your attention. And by the way, that is best handled with a 20-minute phone call if you're on the road that says, hey, honey, how was your day? And let them kind of share what's going on. So they feel cared for, because they're not going to care for you or the company or your customer if they don't think you care for them. And so, by the way, we think the best leadership book is called Care to Dare. It's by George Kohlreiser, the #1 hostage negotiator in the world. He's a professor out of IMD in Switzerland. And that daily routine that the team has, and all of our clients do with their offshore teams in India or Philippines or elsewhere, is part of the key.
Verne, thank you so much. I think that's
I've got good. I'm out of time. I do need to get there and get my car checked in.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. I think, again, just being able to bring that reinforcement, the learning we've been doing here in Arundel House, the place that you've been to a couple of times. Do you want more point?
Yeah, let me just share a 3 points when it comes to talent. First, the most important, we think, Moneyball stat in 2023 is your gross margin dollars per employee. Our ability to raise price was 21 and 22. We had the air coverage of the pandemic, but your ability to raise price in 2023 has been is going to be much more difficult. There, you've got to work internally on process to drive gross margin. And I just want to suggest that most mid-market scale-ups have thrown a lot of people at the problem. And so my view is you could probably do twice the revenue you've got with the existing staff if you could get your pace, your process accountability chart as right as your function accountability chart. So work on gross margin dollars per employee. And our good friend Andy Bailey, who's in the telecommunications retail space, he took that from 75,000, which was the average in his industry, gross margin dollars per employee, to 275,000, 4 times industry average. And when you've got that, it takes all kinds of pressure off wage. That's number one. Number two, the best source of talent, if you need it, is referrals from your own existing employees. And as Jim Clifton said, the CEO of Gallup, the number one determinant of whether an employee will be engaged and happy is they have a friend at work. He says nobody wants to believe him. They've surveyed 100 million employees in every culture every year for 50 years. And so having your own employees refer in people they know and giving really high referral bonuses, average 5,000 pounds instead of 500 pounds, but paid out over a year, is critical. And then number three, and it comes back full circle, is having a fishing hole, a consistent place where you're recruiting talent. So Gene Brown, which I'm sure Neil will share, were these rough and tough gymnasiums throughout Ireland and Great Britain and ultimately into the Middle East where he expanded. And once you start getting some people out of that particular company, that sector of an industry, that gymnasium, then when things work out, they're going to then go back to that fishing hole and draw more of their friends into the business. So now you've got friends, you've got a consistent place to fish. And as long as you're driving gross margin dollars per employee, you'll then have the margins in order to pay the better wages. And now you're in a virtuous cycle instead of in a vicious cycle. And that's ultimately what you want to do. How do we create virtuous cycles instead of vicious cycles? With that, Neil, I bid you guys a day and good luck out there.
Thank you so much, Verne.
You bet. Bye-bye.